Welcome to Sitcom Showdown, a podcast that reviews classic sitcom episodes and inducts them into our very own Hall of Fame. As usual, one of us has chosen a sitcom episode and the other guy has no idea what it's going to be. Will they already know it? Will they love it? Can they be convinced that it's worthy? Let's find out on the Sitcom Showdown. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sitcom Showdown. It's Jeffers here and Steve is just there.
Hello.
So it's your turn, Steve.
It is indeed.
Jolly good. So what have we got for episode 35?
Episode 35 is going to be an episode of Yes, Minister.
Oh!
This one's called The Death List. It's season 2, episode 3. So about halfway through. Shall I tell you a bit about it?
Please do.
Yes, Minister, for those who don't know, is about MP Jim Hacker, who heads up the Department of Administrative Affairs, which seems to be a department that doesn't do a whole lot of much, and I think that's part of the joke.
That's perfect.
His initiatives are usually opposed by his permanent secretary, Sir Humphrey Appleby. And his principal private secretary, who is Bernard Woolley, is usually caught between the two.
Because he's nice.
Yeah, he is nice. He's trying to do right by both sides.
Yeah, it's no place for a nice man.
No, it's not easy. There was a sequel to this called Yes, Prime Minister, and I think there was a reboot in the 2000s, wasn't there?
I heard something about that. Didn't watch it.
Neither did I. But anyway, this is good stuff. It's from the BBC in the UK, and there were 3 seasons from 1980 to 1984. The Minister, Jim Hacker, was played by Paul Addington. Yes. Jeff, where else was Paul featured?
Where wasn't he? The Good Life.
Yep, that's the one I was expecting.
Yeah, he was a much-loved character in The Good Life, Jerry, who was married to Margot, long-suffering Jerry. Oh, man. And other things off the top of my head, I can't think of any other sitcoms, although I'm sure there's a few.
Yep, no, that was the only one I had listed.
Right.
Sir Humphrey is played by Nigel Hawthorne.
Yep.
Who's a fine actor. I've watched him in The Barchester Chronicles.
Right.
From 1982, and he's Archdeacon Grantley in that. Oh, he was also in a movie called The Madness of King George, playing the King, for which he won a BAFTA for Best Actor and a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Actor.
Ah, now did you know who won and for what?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not interested in them. I'm only interested in him. Whatever the case. He deserved to win, and the other person didn't. Let's just say that. And Bernard is played by Derek Fowles, and he was in Heartbeat for 18 years, Jeff.
As the boss?
Well, I think he was a policeman, wasn't he?
Sarge?
I don't know the details.
Something like that. That's all we need to know. Yeah, that's a hell of a run. Trot.
Also featured in this episode, Graham Garden.
I knew that as soon as you said did? The death list.
Oh, yep. Okay. He plays an inspector from MI5. And Michael Keating from Blake 7.
Oh, I forgot he was in that.
He plays Villa in Blake 7. He's in it too. He's another one of these, like the security detail that's following the minister around.
This sounds brilliant.
Glad you think so. This one's written by Anthony J. and Jonathan Lynn. And I thought it was interesting that Jonathan Lynn became a movie director. Don't know if you knew that.
No.
He directed Nuns on the Run.
No, with Robbie Coltrane and Eric Idle.
Yep. Oh. That's an illustrious addition to anyone's CV. My Cousin Vinny and Sergeant Bilko. There's 3 examples.
Well, with Steve Martin, that's Sergeant Bilko.
Yep.
That's one of my favourite movies.
Really?
Brilliant. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm pleased about that.
Oh,
yeah.
I have to ask you about that later. So what's your background to watching this, Jeff? Have you watched much of it before?
Just watching it on the ABC. The whole family gathered around the TV set. So I remember we all used to enjoy Yes, Minister.
Yes, that's my recollection.
Yep. So obviously our parents went, well, this seems like something they're allowed to watch. Let's all watch it together.
Yeah. It's fairly family friendly, even though some of the concepts would go way over the head of the average child.
Oh, totally.
Including me. No doubt. This is on Netflix as well, so I brought along my crusty DVD tonight, but when I do watch it now, I watch it on Netflix, which is much nicer. So, I think we should go and watch this, and then we'll come back and give the fine people a synopsis.
Okay, let's do that.
Yes. Commander Forrest of the Special Branch. Shall I bring him in?
Oh, yes, please do.
Good morning, Commander.
Good morning, Commander.
Good morning, sir.
Do sit down.
Thank you, sir. You've been told about this list, sir.
List? What list? Oh, list, yes.
If I can just brief you on the standard hazards and routine precautions.
Yes, I suppose I don't have to take this sort of thing too seriously, do I?
I admire your courage, sir.
Right, well, shoot.
Well, assassination hazards fall broadly into 4 categories. That's bullets, bombs, poisons, and so-called accidents. Of course, there's also gassing, throttling, stabbing, drowning, garrotting, and ritual disemboweling, but they are relatively uncommon in the UK. Here's your list of standard safety precautions. I'll be in touch.
Oh, thank you, Commander.
So, if you are pushed out of a high window and there's iron railings underneath, try and land on your head. Quicker.
And we're back. Jeff's laughing already. This is a good sign. Let's give you a synopsis of what we just watched. The death list. Bernard enters the office, and he's got a copy of Private Eye, which is some kind of gossipy newspaper, which obviously covers politics. And he says to the minister, I think you better read one of these articles in here. So Jim, reading, he discovers that while in opposition, he was the subject of covert surveillance, including phone tapping. Dun, dun, dun.
Mm-hmm.
And, secondly, as a Minister for Administrative Affairs, Hacker is now in charge of supplying all the government's bugging equipment, thus making him its chief bugger. Hey. The Minister rounds on Sir Humphrey, who's just come into the room, and asks if this story is true. It turns out that, well, the reason that the Minister is so passionate about the second part of this information is that in opposition he organised a nationwide petition about this type of thing to try and put some controls in place. Humphrey, as you'd expect, avoids answering directly, and he describes this kind of thing as an indispensable weapon in the fight against organised crime and presumably terrorism as well. And so this kicks off a bit of a debate between the two, and they're essentially asking if each other are trustworthy. And Humphrey says ministers have enviable intellectual suppleness and moral manoeuvrability.
Yeah, what a fantastic attribute.
Yeah.
They're so morally manoeuvrable.
Yeah.
I'll just cross that off my list of good lines for later on.
Oh, no.
No, that's good.
Oh, no. And he says to Jim, would you trust every one of your cabinet colleagues not to betray confidence? And what about the opposition front bench? And of course he goes, oh,
not that lot.
Not that lot. Nevertheless, Jim decides to put some safeguards in place around this bugging, and he sends Humphrey off to do that. And he also asks Bernard to organise a meeting with a journalist that night in a bar. I wonder what that's about. Well, in the bar that night, Jim leaks the story to the press about putting these safeguards in place.
Yeah, which are that in order for someone to be bugged, rather than it just being done on a whim by whoever, there has to be members of both houses and a law lord giving them only 2 weeks to do stuff. And
yes,
that's
if it has to be extended, you'll come back for another two.
I don't want to bring in all this boring stuff, but it's probably germane to the...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yep. So the days of civil servants just using these kind of things for their own nefarious purposes is over.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's where we're headed with it. Sounds all right, doesn't it?
What does to us ordinary members of the public?
Yes. Afterwards, in bed that night with Mrs. Hacker, Jim is grumbling about having been hacked, complaining to her, and she's completely nonplussed about this and taking the mickey out of it a bit. She obviously thinks their life is so boring, it's highly amusing that anyone would want to listen in to the goings-on in their house. Anyway, she's got other things on her mind. Recess is coming up, and this isn't school recess, is it? This must be...
Parliamentary recess.
Parliamentary recess,
yeah.
So that's coming up, and she suggests they go away for the weekend to Kingsby Down. And he goes, where's that? Darling, that's where we spent our honeymoon. Oh, okay. Whoops.
But I do like the line directly after that where she says, that's where you explain to me the...
Is that the effect of the velocity of circulation on the net growth of money supply?
Yeah. Brilliant.
This piques his interest.
You wonder why he's not finance minister, but there you go.
The next day in the office, or presumably the next day, there's a conversation going on between Bernard and Humphrey. to the effect that the minister has been put on a death list.
Or they've just found out that... Yes,
Well,
sorry.
they've just found out.
I don't want to make it sound like they've put him on a death list, but, well, yeah.
Well, we'll get to that. Apparently it's the International Freedom Army.
Never heard of him.
Not that anyone knows who these people are. The minister comes in, and he's very happy because this article was gone in the paper as a result of his leak to the press the night before. And he says to Humphrey that seeing this in the paper makes him even more determined to go ahead with this initiative to introduce this oversight. And Humphrey says, "Minister, have you considered all the implications?" And he says, "Suppose MI5 discovered someone was planning to assassinate a minister of the Crown." And Jim
Goes on the big...
He goes into the Churchillian
grandstanding,
speech.
yeah, Churchillian. Yeah,
Hands on the lapel. This is a recurring joke in Yes.
Yeah, we must protect the freedom of the people, and if ministers have to die, so be it, is the gist of his spray. And
That's
then,
it, exactly. And he
and
says,
then
"I don't
3
want to hear
seconds
any
later-
more on the subject, Humphrey. My mind is set." And Humphrey says, "Well, I must insist on saying just one more thing." Well, he says, "The special branch have found your name on a death list, and they don't know where to start."
the timing.
Yeah, the timing. Of course, this brings about a bit of a change in demeanour from the minister. He discovers that there's a list of just 3 people on this list, by the way. So it's pretty focused. Next thing you know, Commander Forrest of the Special Branch has come in to put the minister's mind at ease.
Oh, brilliant.
Tell him about all the precautions that they're going to take and that he should...
All the things you should be looking out for.
Yes, a bunch of tips on how he can
Avoid being killed.
avoid being killed in gruesome ways. So this basically involves listing methods of assassination and generally scaring the minister senseless. And he leaves, and Jim asks Humphrey, "Is there anything we can do to find these terrorists before they find me?" We could use surveillance techniques, but they do involve an intolerable intrusion into individual privacy. Basically quoting back
Yeah, exactly.
his words from the day before. So we see Jim start to backpedal on his position, and Bernard wheels in this massive pile of papers in boxes.
Oh,
So
that has to be held down with what looks to be, it's string, but it looks like those massive, another Goodies reference. But it looks like it's held down with those straps you use on trucks to hold things down. So many signatures.
It's enormous. So it's unbidden. This petition that Jim organised while he was in opposition has appeared. Now this is interesting.
Yep.
I wonder how that happened. Anyway, maybe Bernard just used his initiative or something like that.
Oh, you mean he knows that Humphrey might do something nefarious, and so he's countering the something nefarious?
Well, I just was thinking that Jim did mention this the day before, and Bernard might have arranged for it to be brought across to the office. Anyway, we'll move on. There's 2.25 million signatures on this thing, and Jim says, "Shred it." Destroy the evidence.
Oh.
Next, we're on location, Jeff. The hackers are away for their weekend at Kingsby Down, highly romantic location, and they're arriving at a restaurant surrounded by MI5 agents. MI5, yep. It's very romantic. They get them set up at a table, and the next table over, the waiter's unpopping a bottle of champagne, and the next thing you know, Jim's on the floor under the table. Because he's been told that if he hears a gunshot, he should
get under the table.
Get on the floor. Then the next thing you know, the guy from would he be the lead detective or something like that?
Yeah, he'd be the lead bodyguard bloke.
Yeah. So he's at the next table over, so he can keep a close eye on them, right? But he's ordering this 3-course meal that's going to be washed down with this expensive bottle of French wine. He's loving it. It's hungry work, this.
Yeah. It'll be standard procedure for him. God knows how he's going to rush in to protect Jim from a bullet when he's completely chockers on like 4 kilos of food and completely sloshed on this bottle of champagne.
Not going to be pursuing anyone on foot in a hurry, that's for sure.
No way.
I think it was spaghetti bolognese was his first course.
Yeah.
Just that alone would weigh you down.
And then the T-bone steak.
And then they go for a peaceful walk through the woods. It's just them and 5 officers looking after them. They end up at a James Bond movie that night, which wasn't what they wanted, but the secret branch wanted to watch that, so that's what they ended up with. But there's an assassination scene in this movie.
Yep.
Which completely freaks Jim out, so he's out of there.
Yeah, with the sniper getting presumably a government minister in his scope and blowing him away.
Yeah, it's some
Bowler-hatted
umbrellaed
man from the
politician.
ministry.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Anyway, then later that night, they can't get to sleep because there's officers outside their door, and Mrs. Hacker, she's had enough, she's fed up, and she wants to go home. Then they get home, and there's
Cops everywhere with sniffer
on their
dogs,
front
and
lawn, and
the police cars are virtually blocking up the street.
yeah. So they basically have no sleep, even back at home. So it's just terrible. Anyway,
It's a dreadful inconvenience, isn't it? But
It
it's one that Jim should live up to according to his principles.
yes, well, if you're a famous man, you can expect this kind of attention.
Yep.
So the next day, the journalist is actually in the office this time, interviewing the minister, and the minister's really on the back foot because the petition has become known somehow.
Oh.
How? I don't know. Maybe it was leaked. But it becomes apparent that the minister is considering flipping on his position in support of these measures, or at least backpedaling for some unknown reason.
Yeah.
And the journalist's editor wants to know if being on the death list has altered his views on tapping at all.
He's completely trapped.
Yeah, he's trapped. He's equivocating. But he's relieved when Humphrey interrupts this interview. But then Humphrey announced, so the journalist goes out. He sits down with Humphrey. Humphrey announces that MI5 are short-staffed and they must take away his protection. Of course, that just freaks him.
Yeah, because he thinks he's going to get killed.
It's just me looking after myself. Humphrey goes on to say that also they believe that the threat to his life has been diminished. How do they know that, Jeff?
Oh, he's not important enough.
Yes, they intercepted some kind of communication from this
Terrorist group?
Supposed terrorist
Freedom
group.
Army? Saying, let's not kill Hacker because he's
not worth the bullets, basically.
he has no power.
We've
But
got-
Humphrey has to relay this to the minister in the most flattering way he can, which is very difficult.
Yes, they've got bigger fish to fry, so they're moving on. That's marvellous, isn't it? It's like, I'm not important, but at least I'm not going to be killed, so... Is it a good thing? Who
It's a
knows?
very awkward scene.
Anyway, there's now no longer this threat of assassination looming over him, so he asks Bernard for the petition, invites the journalist back in, and the four of them are standing around the petition, which is stacked on this trolley, like we were saying before.
Taller than they are.
And he confirms his support for these new measures and repeats the line about ministers being expendable, but freedom being indivisible. Isn't that right, Humphrey? Yes, Minister.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go.
And that's
The end to every episode, but it's always good when they do that, which is presumably every single episode.
Yeah, but I don't know that Humphrey does it
Yeah, sometimes it's
every time, or in most cases.
Bernard.
I'm reaching for my other notes.
All right, so you've now reached the end of your synopsis.
That is the end of my synopsis. Have I missed anything in the synopsis?
No, I don't think you have. The whole thing's thoroughly entertaining, but I've arrived at the end because I know you're going to bring up these plot things. And it has got me baffled because in the end, the minister gets what he wants, which doesn't usually happen, and I'm wondering why this was allowed to happen. But let's hear the theories.
That's a perfect
and the good
segue to
lines.
my notes.
Oh, really?
because
Okay, let's do that.
I've mentioned before that I like episodes where the minister wins.
Right, good. Let's go.
And I was going to ask you where you thought we ended up, or where we landed on this one. Did the minister win, or
I think he did.
the civil service? Yeah.
No, because the minister wanted to do something. Humphrey was fighting back against this thing. And in the end of the day, the minister gets what he wants and Humphrey doesn't. So that's why I'm a bit mystified.
He does get put through the ringer
Oh, yeah, no, it kept him on his toes.
before he gets there, though.
Yeah, it might just be an exercise in saying, listen, minister, you want to do all these things, but you haven't thought them all through. And I'm just going to demonstrate to you how you haven't thought them all through.
Yes.
And this time I'll let you get what you want.
All right, we'll talk about that a bit more as we go on.
Okay, what have you got?
Okay, so the first thing I like about this episode is that it's kind of ambiguous and subtle.
Mm-hmm.
What do I mean by that? Well, no major hints are dropped, but as we've already alluded to, it's heavily implied that this death list is a work of fiction that's been invented by the civil service to put pressure on the minister to change his position. Would you say? Would you want some...
The timing is exceptional, is that the minister wants to make sure the public don't have this intrusion into their lives with unfettered bugging all over the place. And the very next
The
day,
following day.
he's on a death list and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, we're assuming Humphries made a call to some people and they've set this up.
Do you want some other paranoid
Yeah,
theories?
bring it on. This is right up my street.
At the end of the conversation, or this debate that they're having about the subject, when Humphrey's sent away to make this thing happen, this look comes over his face like he's had a thought, or like the light bulb's gone on.
Yeah.
And he kind of gives a strange look, gets up and walks off. So, I don't know. I think that's put there to make us wonder. The vagueness of the threat is suspicious, and the only specific detail is that he might become the Minister for Defence, which coincidentally is the same reason that Humphrey gives Jim for him having been tapped
In the first
before
place.
the election.
Uh-huh.
Strange coincidence. The security briefing from MI5 appears designed to scare, not reassure.
Totally. Yep.
And then the officers themselves don't seem to be taking this threat too terribly seriously.
No, not really.
Watching the movie, like as Jim gets up to depart the cinema, they're being left behind looking back at the screen.
Yeah, they're making the token motions to get out of their seat and leave the cinema. They're looking back over their shoulders, walking up very slowly.
Yeah. Yep.
Ah.
They're living it up at the restaurant, and it's a coincidence that MI5 had to move on to another, presumably legitimate security risk, and then Jim's name gets dropped off the death list almost straight after for no apparent reason.
So I'm going to say Special Branch because I think we keep getting mixed up between MI5 or Special Branch, but that's neither here nor there. So let's just say Special Branch have been guarding Jim as a favour to Humphrey by pulling strings here or there. And then obviously this new legitimate threat comes up about the Russian, whoever it is,
Yep.
the Russian envoy or whatever. So they've got to go off and do that. So then Humphrey's got to scramble to come up with a reason why he's been downgraded, why he's not being protected.
So they can't keep the pressure up.
They can't keep the pressure
anymore.
up. So then he has to perhaps come up with the thing that he's been downgraded and they've intercepted this communication.
Yes, that's one of my theories.
But that still proves how useful the interception with the surveillance is.
Yep.
So it proves Humphrey's point, it just doesn't get the result. I don't know, am I going in the right direction here?
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of heading in the same direction.
Okay.
Anyway, I just love the fact that there's this whole other side to the story of what's going on, but we don't get to see any of that.
Yeah.
And it lets us come up with all this sort of crazy stuff. And I've watched this episode a fair bit.
Okay.
But I'd say I've only viewed it through the lens of this paranoid fantasy the last couple of times I've watched it.
Yes, you mean Jim's? Or what we're supposed to get
Well,
from the...
So I only just recently came to the conclusion that this whole death list could have been a concoction of the civil service.
Yep.
Whereas Patrice, when I mentioned it to her last night, she said, yeah, it's obvious.
Right.
So maybe everyone else has always got this from the start, and I'm late to the party. But it works on face value, even if you don't go down that track. But if you do think that way, then it adds a whole other layer to it.
We're probably concentrating too much on the plot and not on the comedy. But yes, sorry, I won't cut you off.
Oh no, I'm going to continue on in that vein for a little bit longer. Well, what it does do, putting aside which side ends up winning, it allows us to explore a very serious subject in a comedic way. So it's just as topical as in 2018 as it was in 1981 when this was made.
Totally.
The rights of the individual versus the rights of society as a whole.
Yep.
Well, let's look at how they do it in a humorous way. Jim is outraged to find that he as an individual is subjected to this surveillance to ensure that society was protected if he becomes Minister of Defence. But then when the death list is published, he's happy to have other individuals subjected to surveillance to try and ensure his safety.
Yeah. Hypocrisy.
So he even argues the benefit of this surveillance to society outweighs the privacy of the individual. Yeah,
it's a complete 180. And we love seeing pompous people have their hypocrisy exposed.
Yes,
which is really nice.
As Humphrey says, it's better to have your privacy invaded than your country invaded.
But again, it's all down to how the conversations are done in a similar way to the games.
Continuing on to the hypocrisy of Yes Minister, or the hilarious hypocrisy in Yes Minister.
Yeah.
Jim and Humphrey have this lively conversation where it becomes apparent that Jim doesn't trust his cabinet colleagues or the opposition because they leak. But then that night he goes out and leaks information to this journalist, proving that he's completely untrustworthy.
Oh, shamelessly. And I love the conversation with the journalist, whose name we should have remembered but haven't, about, so who can I attribute this to? How are we going to leak this? Should I be... What I think we'll do is we'll put in a clip.
Can I attribute it? The minister speaks out.
No.
So where did I get the story? And I can't say it was officially announced. How about sources close to minister?
Hey, hold on. I don't want everybody to know I told you. Couldn't you do a speculation is growing in Westminster?
Be weak.
Unofficial spokesman.
Used that twice this week already.
The cabinet's leaking like a sieve, isn't it?
How would you like to be an informed source?
Okay. Informed source.
It's quite a joke, really, isn't it?
What?
Describing someone as informed when his permanent secretary is Sir Humphrey Appleby.
There you go. It's better than us retelling it, isn't it?
It is. Then I like that they double down on this because that deed, which is him leaking this information to the journalist, is the thing that puts him in a real pickle later when it becomes public knowledge that he supports the addition of these controls.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that's also explored because Humphrey would say that no additional oversight is required, but at every turn he avoids providing any kind of detailed information to the minister. And unless you ask him a specific question and harass him, you won't get a thing.
Oh, absolutely. And in the very start of the episode, when Hacker's trying to find out whether the rumour is true or whether what the papers say about him having been surveilled while he was in opposition is true, he literally asks Humphrey, is this true? And Humphrey, again, skillfully...
I wouldn't put
put
too much weight on it.
I don't think we need to concern ourselves too much with this minister.
Goes nowhere near answering the question.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
So there's no transparency in the civil service. They're off doing their own thing. And by the way, I think Humphrey knew what was in the private eye before he walked into the room.
Oh, he'd know everything in advance and has to be 10 steps ahead. He's not just playing 4D chess, he's playing 10D chess. Humphrey's a master. You've got to admire him.
Humphrey's playing 4D chess. You heard it here first.
And that's the theme of the whole program, really, isn't it?
Yep.
Just basically the civil service wants to govern and it has to put up with these people who keep getting put in there after elections.
Yep. Usually
shuffled around.
Usually they're put in there with no talent, simply to pay off favours or something like that.
Yeah.
That's occurred during the election. And they talk about that in this episode.
Oh.
The last note before we get into some gags is that this whole idea is summed up in a funny way in the final scene where Humphrey is obscured and pretty much hidden by the boxes containing the petition, which represents society's demand for greater transparency when he concedes the point to the minister.
Very symbolic.
Very symbolic.
Nice analysis there, man.
Thanks, Ben.
All right.
Now I've just got a list of funny gags.
Okay.
We're past all that kind of heavy...
Yeah. I've got my pen at the ready so I can cross off all the ones I wrote down that you'll also have listed.
Why don't you go first?
Well, it's the Humphrey at the beginning of the episode trying to get the minister to understand that surveillance is a very effective weapon against organised crime. And Hacker says, you're not suggesting that politicians are organised crime.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Humphrey goes, well, disorganised crime, perhaps?
Far out.
And that's just brilliant.
How does he not get away with... How does he get away with it?
This is what the show does to you. It turns you around and suddenly you don't know what's happening. And that's exactly what Humphrey does to Hacker. But yeah, I don't know how he gets away with it because he is the power base and ministers are ephemeral. They float in, they float out. And his explanation was, look, Minister, I didn't want to risk answering a question you weren't asking. So he absolutely doesn't want to give up any information on anything. He says, well, why didn't you tell me my department's responsible for buying all the bugging equipment? Well, you didn't ask.
Yeah.
What? Anyway. And after who I'll call Graham Garden, but it's Commander Forrest of Special Branch, it brilliantly explains all the methods by which he could be killed. He ends on one, with the umbrella with the poison tip jabbed into the calf. And he goes, if they do that, then Bob's your uncle. Your late uncle.
Yeah.
And again, I haven't done it justice, but after that whole screed, it's just brilliantly delivered. It's a brilliant gag.
And as he says that, he looks to Bernard and to Humphrey
with a cheeky
smile. and they're just cackling themselves.
Oh. And the last one is when the journalist is talking to Jim Hacker about the petition, and poor old Jim's completely stuck. And he goes, look, the journalist says, are you accepting or rejecting the petition? And Jim just says, no. And in our house, we call that a double-barreled question, and we like to deliberately answer with exactly that response.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man.
He obviously hasn't been taking lessons from Humphrey about how to answer these questions.
No, not at all. Yeah, and there's a lot of Humphrey's typical long, impenetrable answers. There's not as many as in a usual episode, I would argue, from memory, but the 2 or 3 he gives here are pretty good.
So the newspaper describes Jim as the egregious Jim Hacker, and as he's reading this out, he pauses to ask Humphrey, egregious, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And Humphrey says, it means you're outstanding in one way or another.
It's a very diplomatic answer, and so Jim doesn't press it any further.
I'm surprised he doesn't know what egregious means. But anyway, we'll overlook that. Mrs. Hacker's very funny.
Yep.
I like her. She's, well, until the very end where she's been pushed to the max. She's very light-hearted and she obviously loves her husband, but kind of pulls the mickey out of him.
Oh, totally. She's puncturing his balloon of pompousness.
Yes. His reaction to his name being on the death list when he's been led down the garden path by Humphrey.
That's my number one note here, actually, is it just says, Paul Eddington is terrific at looking worried. Yeah. And he has some brilliant hand acting going on as well that reminded me a bit of Tim Brooke Taylor. Paul Eddington's just great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's another bit of stuff which we haven't mentioned where he's got the letter opener and he's kind of fiddling about with that nervously, and then Graham Garden grabs the letter opener off him and then uses it as part of his explanation where he's talking about stabbing. So he gets the letter opener and jams it into the table, and he talks about some kind of
ritual disemboweling, and he turns the thing up and as if you were cutting up through someone's stomach or something like that. Anyway, that's really funny, but we digress. One of the measures that MI5 proposes to keep the minister safe is to bug his phone. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is just...
because the killers...
You barely even notice that because it's just part of all these things that he's rattling off one at a time. But anyway, that's funny. It's a bit about not shredding. No. They don't want this petition to be found, so...
Jim goes, shred it.
He says, shred it. And Bernard says, if you don't want it found, I better file it.
Yeah. I was a bit immune to that one because we listened to, Jane and I listened to Men from the Ministry quite a lot. And that went from either the 60s or 1971 up to, almost the 80s or something. Anyway, yeah, Men from the Ministry has a lot of that gag. In fact, that gag is found in almost every episode. Yeah, it's a great gag.
I like the order that Humphrey reveals this information about MI5 withdrawing the security detail and the threat subsiding.
Yeah, he could have
easily come in and say, good news, the threat's subsided. And you don't need your MI5 detail anymore, but instead he says, Minister, I've got to let you know this MI5.
Bad news.
Security details are being removed. So he lets him go, oh my goodness.
Gets him in a real panic.
Tells him the second part of it after that.
Yeah, so not only does he just give him the good news, he first gets him in a panic and then insults him.
Yeah.
It's completely mind-gaming him to undermine his confidence.
And that's my last one, is there's this brilliant comic timing in that conversation where Humphreys just said about the threat subsiding, and he says that you're not important enough. He sums it up by saying, you're not important enough to assassinate. And then he says, I don't agree with them, of course. And you have to go back and rewatch Jim's reaction to this. He leaves this extra long pause in, and he goes to say something, but then stops himself. And you can hit...
Yeah, the cogs are
turning.
His brain.
He's trying to process this. First, the information that he's not important enough to be assassinated, but then Humphrey's come out and said, I don't agree with him.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant.
And then makes him explain. And then poor old Humphrey's in a trap. Not that he cares what the minister thinks. There's a similar thing as well earlier when Humphrey's explaining the differences in how reliable and trustworthy your civil servant is compared to a minister.
Yeah.
And then at the end he goes, why, you yourself might even be a public servant minister. And he has to turn to Bernard for interpretation and confirmation and say, is this a compliment? And Bernard goes, oh, the highest compliment, Minister.
Yes, the ultimate compliment.
Yeah. And we probably didn't get enough of Bernard gags in this one.
No, he was pretty quiet in this one.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the humour is. And you just like to see him in the middle, being nice and genuine in amongst all the snake oil going on either side.
Anyway, I've come to the end of my notes.
Right.
Have you got anything else to...
Well, if I do,
add?
yeah, it'd just be making your case for you.
Okay.
So firstly, it's got Graham Garden in it, which means straight away, as soon as I heard you pick this episode, I went, yep, we're in
That's a
here.
plus.
And as you mentioned, Villa from Blake 7. But those two guys are brilliant guest stars on their own. So that's a plus on top of all the normal Yes Minister goodness. Brilliant cast in Yes Minister. Like the games last week, the Yes Minister is so good at revealing all the hidden machinations behind all our institutions. It's just a brilliant show. And I think, did we discuss any awards Yes Minister might have won? We've talked about the actors. Best Comedy Series 82, Best Comedy Series 83, Best Comedy Series 81. Okay, so cleaned up. A whole bunch of BAFTAs. So yes, that's all reasons why I reckon it should go into the Hall of Fame, but it's not my argument to make.
Oh, okay, well, I don't really have a summation written down other than to say they take this extremely serious, up-to-the-minute subject and explore it in a really funny way through basically making Jim putting him completely through the ringer.
Yeah.
That's why I like it.
Yeah, so it's intellectual, but enjoyable, even for wee kiddies as we were when we were watching this. At 10 years old or something.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a winner of a series, and it's a winner of an episode.
Well, thanks for joining us again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. See you later.
Bye!
Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.